Are there lessons that the United States should be taking from her victory when it comes to electing women?
Hmm. I mean, I think, of course, it would be ideal if our country were moving quicker in that direction. Certainly now, if we do catch up, and I hope we do, it'll be after this long list of countries that I've just mentioned. In the Americas, this long list of democracies.
Now, just this afternoon, President Biden indicated that he intends to sign an executive order that will limit asylum seekers at the US-Mexico border. I don't know, has Sheinbaum commented on this? And perhaps more broadly, what does her election mean for US-Mexico relations?
No, not that I've seen. She's just the election is here. It's just wrapping up. So really the focus has been domestic. Look, I think migration in Mexico, there's two things to say about this issue. One is that Mexico is often enlisted to do the enforcement that the US doesn't want to do or can't do, or simply needs Mexico's cooperation to do. So the Mexican border officials and immigration authorities are extremely involved in detaining immigrants that are headed down towards the US, to detaining irregular migrants, to deporting them further south, and that's become a hallmark of governments here going back years. But Lopez Obrador has recently really stepped things up. Since January, the enforcement against irregular migrants traveling through Mexico has increased. That's why we've seen fewer migrants showing up at the U.S.-Mexico border. There's actually been quite a significant drop. I think it'll depend if Sheinbaum continues some of those strong enforcement policies, whether that trend will continue. Now, that said, the second point I would mention is that Mexico is increasingly a destination country for migrants, both migrants who want to make it to the US and end up having no means to go further, building lives here, and those who seek asylum here from Central American countries and from further south. So Mexico is now becoming an important host country to migrants. That is creating some friction, some challenges. I think it's also an opportunity for the country. This is an aging country that needs more young workers. I think there's certain advantages to the fact that more and more people are seeing opportunity here in Mexico. Sheinbaum, I think, will try to work with whoever is elected the next US president, whatever his migration policy might be. But I do think that with a second Trump term, there could be definite tensions. I know Sheinbaum's team would not look kindly, for instance, on the reimposition of a policy called Remain in Mexico, which had asylum seekers essentially forced to wait on the Mexico side of the border. Look, in northern Mexico, that creates all types of really troublesome, disturbing dynamics. Even there's large-scale migrant kidnapping by organized crime groups. Obviously, this puts stress on local communities. So Mexico views that as a bit of a vulnerability, and I think that the more extreme the next president is on migration and on really trying to lock down the U.S. border, regardless of the costs, the more friction that could create with the Sheinbaum government.
So it sounds like the November elections in the US could have a real impact on her term, or at least 4 years of her term. If it's Biden, it's kind of the status quo, but if it's Trump, it's a return to extremist policies that make her job more difficult.
Yeah, and it's worth noting here that AMLO, interestingly enough, despite considering himself a leftist, had a very friendly relationship with Donald Trump, and sometimes continues to suggest that he has a friendly relationship. Sheinbaum, I think there will be more friction again because she comes from the student movement, this human rights focused left, because she is herself a scientist, right? I think that there are a number of personal factors there that could make their relationship quite tough. Her team is still being careful to say we'll work with anybody, and frankly, that's the way it has to be. The U.S. and Mexico are each other's largest trading partners. We share a very long land border, of course, and we're just deeply integrated as countries. So of course that cooperation needs to be there, regardless of who's in office. But again, I do think that that it may be rougher down the road between Sheinbaum and, let's say, a second Trump term than it was between her predecessor AMLO and Donald Trump his last time around.
What's the number one thing you expect to see from her in her first term?
I think that, again, I expect to see her pledging to continue Lopez Obrador's most popular policies. Those were, again, increasing the minimum wage. There's another increase planned for next year. Those include cash transfers to the youth of Mexico and to older adults, universal cash transfers. But I think that she's also going to have to figure out how to finance all this. Now, Lopez Obrador was very careful with financing, with balancing the budget his first years in office. However, his last year, he started to spend big. Many people believe with the idea of turning out the vote, and which seems to have worked pretty effectively for him. But now Sheinbaum is left with a pretty tricky fiscal situation, the highest debt to GDP ratio in Mexico for several years and I think decades. So she's going to probably have to make some cuts somewhere. She may have to pass a tax reform, which will be politically difficult. So it'll be, again, that balance between sustaining what made AMLO popular in terms of economic and social policy, but also figuring out how to make it more sustainable for the long run.